The following is my conversation with Will Fripp. Will is a UK industry veteran with decades of experience across all segments of the cycling business. Will's journey spans from his early days working at bike shops and Evans Cycles to leadership roles at Madison, the UK's largest distributor, and Shift Active Media. He is now the head of Extra UK, one of the country's premier cycling distributors, and Will offers unique insights into the evolution of the industry, particularly in post-Brexit Britain. In this conversation, we'll explore how distribution has transformed in the digital age, the challenges of navigating Brexit and the pandemic's boom and bust cycle, and the current state of the UK cycling market. Will brings a wealth of knowledge about brand management, marketing strategy, and the delicate balance of curating the right assortment of brands that complement rather than compete with each other. Join us for a fascinating look at the past, present, and future of cycling distribution in the UK through the eyes of someone who has lived it from all angles. This is the Business of Cycling podcast.
Will Fripp. I'm so happy to finally get a distributor on this podcast. I've been wanting to get a distributor, and now I have one.
It's always good to be a first.
Yes. So we spoke, we met, and I appreciate you coming on today. I'm excited to get to dive in and let people know your story. You've got a really, really long history in cycling. You also worked on the agency side as well as in bike shops, and now you're in one of the biggest distributors in the UK. And today I get to hear all about your adventures, and I've been actually really hoping to give the audience a peek inside post-Brexit UK cycling distribution. So very happy to have you. Thank you so much for coming
Thank you
on.
very much.
Where does the podcast find you today?
I'm at home. I'm working from home.
Okay.
Yeah, Extra's have always been quite a remote company. We've got like people from all over the UK. We're trying to try and follow the talent rather than necessarily try and get everyone into the same location. So actually the pandemic was relatively easy for us as a business because we were kind of already all remote anyway.
The remote is sort of a requirement for very high talent individuals that you've noticed.
Well, I think if you want the right talent, it's best to be able to have a much bigger pool. We're only a small island.
I get it. Yeah.
But having a bigger pool to choose from, right?
Sure. Great. So yeah, today we're gonna jump in. I guess we can start. I'd given you kind of an overview of what we could talk about today. So I don't know, you want to just get started and tell me a little bit about where you're from and a little bit about your origin story?
Sure, yeah. Well, I guess I'm one of those guys that gets unfortunately called an industry veteran, basically because that's all I've done. I've been around the bike industry since I was a child. I've always loved bikes. I think I only ever had one brand new bike as a kid. I remember Christmas Day with a brand new bike. It was a Rally Bomber. It was a pretty special moment. But we didn't actually have a lot of cash, so my dad used to do bikes up for us. He used to renovate bikes, and I think I may have sort of caught the bug from him, really.
Where are you from?
Well, the south of the UK. I sort of grew up in Woking, in Surrey, and I'm still around that kind of area now. Unfortunately, never near my place of work. Never have been. Always loved to commute. I was going to join the army, actually, but I fell into cycling and I just stayed. I guess I was sort of starting to earn better than I saw the pay scales were in the army. And I thought, you know what? I was an Army Cadet Force instructor for 10 years until my kids came along. So I was teaching kids and I was still getting my fill, as it were, of army life.
So 10 years in the army?
No, 10 years teaching Army cadets.
Okay.
So kids, like 12 to 18-year-old kids.
Like part-time or what is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Weekends and evenings, yeah.
Okay. And so you like structure, I take it.
I think you've guessed that already.
Yeah.
I do quite like structure.
Well, structure is great for business. It's not great, and what I've learned is not always great for creativity, but it's very good for business.
Yeah. No, I don't think it stops you being creative either, but I hear what you're saying.
I've talked to some creative people, and a lot of them are very strong on the idea that chaos is creative, and you have to have some element of chaos to have creativity. Of course, you can structure your chaos.
I think I've met people on both sides for sure. Certainly when I was working in the agency business and it had a big creative team, yes, they were definitely more chaotic and definitely a bit more frustrating to someone like me. But yeah, no, I've seen the organized creative, the odd one.
Okay. And so you grew up, what was like your first job then? Like where did you first kind of approach? I take it you didn't study at university,
No, I never went to uni.
never went to
No,
uni.
I did A levels, and during that time, I sort of had part-time jobs in the bike industry. I actually got my first job before my 13th birthday. In the olden days, when there were markets and market stalls in Woking, there was a bicycle stall that did repairs and sold parts and accessories, and I got a Saturday job working for them just before my 13th birthday, and that eventually he eventually got a store, Collins Cycles in Old Woking. And again, I worked as a Saturday lad and in the holidays fixing bikes and selling bikes and parts and accessories. But during that time, I kind of became an enthusiast cyclist as well. So I was buying, the latest mountain bike or whatever else, and able to buy it at trade price, which was very exciting within my friend group, as you can imagine. So I always had lots of nice gear.
This
Uh,
is this is the 90s, I presume, right?
this is the 90s. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I bought myself a Diamondback Axis team with Dior XT and thumb shifters, and it was like, cutting edge. It was amazing.
Yeah, Diamondback. My first mountain bike was a Diamondback Sorrento.
Oh,
I'm around your age, so I think we're in the
I sold a
same.
lot of them. I sold
Yeah,
a
that was
lot of them back in the day. Yeah.
and I actually bought a RockShox Judy and aftermarket and put it on. That was a big spent $200 for that. I still remember that. So mountain bike was big at the
Yeah, mountain
time.
bike was I was always more of an off-road rider than a roadie. I've had various, I have a road bike now. I don't ride it often. I admit I far prefer riding off-road, always have. These days I still ride weekly, but I have an e-mountain bike. I have an All-Bear, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, the
Um,
EMTBs are great.
it's just great fun.
They are great.
And
Yeah.
I ride with some really fit people. So for me, it's like a leveler because they're riding analog and I'm on my e-mountain bike and still just about able to keep up. So that.
100%, 100%.
But when I was 16, I was, as you can imagine, I was becoming a bit more of a snob, and it was a pretty low-end bike shop. So at 16, you were able to get a job in a more mainstream retailer. So I got a job at Evans back in the day when Evans, who were a huge chain, more recently. In those days, there was only 3 stores, and again, I got a Saturday job there, worked in the holidays, did really well at sales, always winning sales bonuses and stuff like that. And that evolved into a full-time job after my A levels because I was applying to join the army. So it was like, and that's a really long process. So I stayed there and learned loads in retail. Did pretty well
What
there.
size store are we talking about? You mentioned Evans. I don't know UK retail
Oh,
as well
Evans.
as
Well, in those days, Evans was a really premium retailer. I mean,
okay.
like custom builds. I think they were like the biggest specialized retailer in the UK at that time.
Important.
We were selling 8 Cannondales on a Saturday back when Saturdays were big. It was a large premium retailer. And we used to get celebrities in there and all sorts of things. It was a great store to work in. And one of the managers left and he did all their advertising back in the mail order days.
Okay.
And
And what sort of advertising was happening?
well, I mainly got involved in the local advertising stuff, but I mean, double page spreads in mountain bike magazines with product listings and that kind of stuff. Mail order was quite big for Evans back in the day.
Catalogs.
Yeah, yeah. And I got involved in the advertising side because I was already a Mac user and no one else was. So I was last minute panic advert creation in Quark Express and stuff like that. And I
Oh,
guess
cool. So
that was my
layouts for ads.
yeah, that was my entry point into marketing, I guess you could really say, which has kind of been the foundation of the rest of my career. But I got a job at another bike shop, Farnham Cycles, as the shop manager. He then got another shop in Aldershot, and I became the buyer for both of those stores. And then I got bored of retail. All my friends were off at weekends, and I hated working weekends. So I decided to shift things up a little bit.
For
And
the distribution side, you were thinking.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, that looked like the holy grail to me at the time. So I applied for a job at Madison, who were and still are the largest distributor in the UK. They are the Shimano distributor. And I was employed by a guy called Richard Peplow, who I respect to this day and still speak to, even though he's retired.
So
And
Madison at that time it still had Shimano.
correct, yeah.
And do you have an idea of what the turnover was back then, when you
Uh,
first came on?
I think it was in the 40s of millions at that
So
time.
it's sizable, very big.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. They were the biggest by far then, and
Yeah.
they remain still a very large distributor.
Yeah. So that must have been for you a huge, great opportunity.
It was, yeah. I mean, I joined as a junior brand manager, and I was looking after the non-exclusive brands, which was, considered at the time, I guess, the lowest of the a
Sure.
starting, a
Sure.
starting.
Absolutely.
But then
Family owned business
no, at the time when I joined, it was actually a public company. It was a PLC,
was quoted.
and then got bought out by a private individual who still owns it now.
And so going from like, I don't know how structured things were at the bike shops that you worked at, but to go to a bigger organization like this, what was that like?
It wasn't that dissimilar. It wasn't that dissimilar, really. I mean, very, obviously a very different job. Being a product manager in those days was all about, organizing products and pricing and promotions and displays and trade shows and training and things. And that job is pretty constant in similar businesses, even in my business now. We refer to them as brand managers these days rather than
Right.
product managers.
And do they have P&Ls then? They have their own P&Ls?
No, no, they just their brands push in towards a sort of company P&L. But certainly they, brand managers, product managers then and now have responsibility over the performance of their own brand for sure. In terms
Right.
of
So not necessarily
profitability.
like an actual income statement, but they do have directives and they have objectives on the growth of each of those brands and they'll come in and I presume that you will go in on a monthly or quarterly basis and say, okay, here's how things are going. This is our plan. This is the innovation we're thinking of coming up with. Like tell me about that job.
Okay, well, on an at least monthly basis, to be honest. I mean, every year businesses, distribution businesses, like most businesses, have a business plan. That business plan is formed up in our business by brand plans,
Right.
right? So each brand manager creates a brand plan, which is around everything that they know that's going on with their brand in the next 12 months. So the
Innovation, new products,
exactly,
launches.
NPD, yeah, bestsellers, stock forecasts, purchase forecasts, sales forecasts, therefore profitability
Sure.
forecasts. And then marketing plans are built to support those brand plans. They're an integral part of the brand plan. And then they feed all into one company plan, right? And then
Sure.
you
And
have
there,
your
this
sales and
P&L
marketing plan
profitability.
support. Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you know, in every distribution business I've ever worked at, every forecast for every year is built from the product up, from an individual SKU up, right?
Sure.
Expectations rather than some big halo, we're going to do 50 million pounds, go figure out how we're going to do it. We've always started at the bottom up and seen how that stacks up and how that pans out and matches the management expectation, I guess.
And I think it's the same in brands where they have product lines and each of those lines kind of contributes to, their P&L.
Yeah, I think modern day complex retail, a developed retail are
Sure.
thinking pretty much in the same
Departments,
basis. These are
departments.
all just links in the supply chain, right?
Correct.
But we all have pretty much the same tasks and the same goals and the same jobs, just in different stages of that supply chain.
Totally. And so tell me about your time at Madison. It looks like, I presume that you were there for 16 years
I was
and
there for 16 years,
and
yeah.
you got to do a lot of different roles, I presume.
I did, yeah, yeah. I was junior brand manager, then I was brand manager, then I was own brand manager, and that was actually probably one of my happiest periods in my life because
Why?
because that was creative, right? That was finding a gap in the market or a gap in
And,
the range,
and you guys
finding
would create brands?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
creating own brands or developing existing own brands,
Right.
sourcing product, packaging, design, marketing, the whole shebang really. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing that. That was just in P&A. I wasn't involved in their own brand bikes. They had a sort of separate department for complete bicycles. But own brand P&A was a substantial part of their business at the time. And then Then came IT, then came e-commerce, then came, and really sort of more and more technology getting introduced into the business in sort of mid 2000s. And I became e-commerce manager, working with our IT team and the leadership team and our sales team, developing B2B websites, consumer websites, that kind of stuff. And I got heavily involved in that, led that at Madison for quite a while. They then had a change of management, a change of leadership, and the boss at the time asked me to step in and run marketing for the business. So it was a bit of a sidestep, but I think he knew it was kind of my flair and my interest. So I took over marketing in that business, and marketing became more and more evolved. It became more and more of an integral part of distribution, I guess, actually, not just Madison, and adding value, which I guess we'll come to later. And so I spent a long time in running marketing for Madison. Did some amazing stuff, did some really cool campaigns for some of the brands that we did, but also got some great opportunities. Like with Shimano, I helped them organize the 2012 Olympics neutral support team and got to work at the Olympics for 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome,
Yeah, it is.
That was pretty cool. But I learned a lot in my time there as well from people like Patrick Barker, who was their commercial director. He taught me an awful lot. And they had some pretty smart people there.
I,
And
I have a,
then,
I have a question about, sorry to interrupt. I
yeah,
have a
great.
question about, so you started doing e-commerce and I'm assuming in the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006. And I know that now e-commerce is sort of mature. It's much more mature for the brands. But man, if you're telling me that you guys were doing e-commerce back in 2005, what sort of tension was created with the brands? Because I guess what I'm trying to say is the brands have always it's such a threat to the deal. It's always been sort of a threat to the dealer. How did you
It
guys
was
approach it?
yeah, it was B2B. It was predominantly B2B.
Okay,
So
sure. So
yeah,
digitizing the ordering for your dealers.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
The idea at the time, which many distributors were going through, was to make as many different interactions between a retailer and a distributor available digitally 24/7.
Sure. Sure.
Whether that's a returns process or an accounts process or shopping and buying. But
It
yeah,
was
really
digital transformation, I guess is what you guys called it.
exactly
Yeah.
digital. Yeah, I mean there was a consumer face to it, and at one point in the early days there was a click and collect system, so it actually kept the retailers in the mix. So there wasn't really any sensitivity about that. It At that time, to be honest, it was long before click and collect was really a thing, so it didn't actually work out. But it's quite ahead of the time.
And then on the marketing side, I guess at that time, if you were going in the 2010s, you were starting to see a lot of changes in the way brands market. And I guess at that time, what were some of the things that you found to be critical for success for a distributor in the marketing side of things?
Well, I mean, the most significant change, I guess, was a shift to digital marketing, right?
Sure.
You know, in the early days of marketing as a distributor, you were placing print it was really about advertising, PR,
And events,
PR
of
in
course.
terms of like, yeah, and events. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And that took up the lion's share of your time and your budget, to be honest.
Sure.
And then really as things became more digital, this is long before social media was really a thing or a platform that you would use for marketing.
But
That
but then it was.
Yeah, but then it was.
But
But
then it
then it was
was.
exactly. And that was a complete minefield that everyone had to navigate. Learning your place as a distributor
Sure. Because
has
nobody
always
knew.
been. Yeah, no, 100%. Because, if you're a consumer, right, a distributor's social media channel means nothing, right? You're not gonna you may look at the website for a retailer or the social media channel for the retailer, or if you're interested in a product, you may look at the brand's digital presence, whether that's their website or their social channel or their influencers or all these type of things. But a distributor's place digitally is really to its customer, the retailers, right?
Okay.
It's just a link in the chain, but supporting brands as their man in the UK, as it were, and that really is the key.
Well, enabling them.
part of the partnership. Sorry.
Enabling the
Oh,
brands.
100%. Yeah. In the early days of being a distributor, it was like, here's a price list. Brands would be like, here's a price list, here's a logo. If you're lucky, here's some product images, right? Here's your license for the UK.
Yeah.
And,
And I'll
and,
be
and
and I'll be screaming at you in 3 months if you don't hit this number.
yeah, 100%. But now, brands are global. The internet changed everything. It really did, right?
It
Present.
totally, and what I'm seeing is brands need to interact directly with it. This is a really interesting topic because there's no real rules around it. What I feel like is brands need to be more engaged with customers. This is a super interesting point that we see that, distributors are acting and enabling the brands in a local sense. And when digital came about, it seems like as a layman, you would say, oh, okay, well now the brands are going to take care of all that and the distributors will do less. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that enablement, even at the digital level, is really happening. We were talking about Amazon, like distributors are acting on behalf of the brands on Amazon in a digital world because they have the resources and it's just, and I presume that with maybe with localized ads and even sometimes acting on behalf of the brand as for the e-commerce. So I mean, it's interesting how, you would think that the brands would just kind of reach in and start taking everything and doing it, but it has not played out that way.
Marketing works best locally, right? Or with a local message, something that is believable, something that you can align with as a rider or as a consumer. Sure, global is important, but equally endless pictures of people riding down the wrong side of the road with yellow lines where we have white, stuff like that, right? Content is either relatable or it isn't. Sure, there is the piece of supporting local retail digitally, whether that's your e-commerce customers or Amazons of the world, or even IBDs with their own web presence. That's a massive part of the job these days, is giving, sharing assets,
Enabling them, yeah.
helping them with exactly, yeah,
And
exactly.
checking up on them.
But actually, the best distribution relationships are truly partnerships, and I think actually since the digital world, those partnerships have almost become closer because you have to cooperate deeper, wider, as brand and distributor, not just on global marketing plans, on the
Sure.
evolution of
How
the
to
content
leverage,
created.
how to
Yeah,
leverage those assets, how to share those assets.
yeah, but even asset creation. We have some of our brands where we do all their shoots in the UK,
Yeah.
right? And they use them internationally as well. It good distributors are almost an extension of the brand, right? And almost an extension of the brand's company. I think we've got some partners, and I've certainly seen it over the years where they definitely feel like we're an extension of their business, and that's great. We're part of the family.
Well, and I've had conversations with CEOs where they'll be like, we make the products, we have the IP of the products, and then we enable distributors to sell and to activate those geographic areas. And that's the symbiotic relationship you're talking about.
It is, except I don't think that a brand can only do that now, right? Because, as I said, a consumer will either look at a point of purchase, a retailer, or they'll look at the brand, right? So, if someone's looking to buy a pair of physique shoes, they're not going to go to the Extra website, right? They're going to go to, a UK retailer store, or they're going to look at a local retail website, or they're going to look at physique.com, right?
No,
As
sure,
an
of course.
example, they're looking at the brand. So there is a global marketing responsibility and job required by brands themselves for sure, but enabling the brand to be relevant to key market riders, enabling the rollout of any new product within a given territory, enabling the retailers to sell that product and promote it digitally. That's all part and parcel of what a distributor does.
I want to get into e-tailers in a second here, but before we go into that minefield, you were at Shift for 7 years.
I
And
did a very short stint at Specialized.
Oh,
after Madison.
yes, you
I
did.
was there for a year. It was a brand I always loved and
Porsche.
respected. I didn't have that much of an enjoyable time. I had a great first 6 months and a less great second 6 months. And I got a call from a good friend of mine, Simon Weir, who owned Shift Active Media and Play Sports at the time, the GCNs and
Yeah,
GMB
GCN. Yep.
world. And he said, well, if you're that unhappy, he said, why don't you just come and work for me? And I did. And I stayed there for 6 or 7 years at Shift.
So tell me, I want to hear about that because Shift is sort of this in the agency world. They are cycling specific, and I think they tacked on this outdoor word I noticed a couple of years ago. And they are sort of an enigma because they have really, really gone full blast on we are a cycling specific media agency.
Yeah.
And everybody knows who they are, and they have wonderful clients. And I'm gonna talk with their CEO, I think, in a couple of weeks. But yeah, it's just a very interesting business model. I know that Simon comes from the PR world,
He came from the media background.
media buyer, and so he sort of built Shift out of this need. And then of course Play was a huge success with GCN, and then I think they sold part of that to YouTube.
They're two separate businesses. Shift and Play Sports are very
Oh,
much
okay.
two
They're
separate
separate. Okay.
businesses. So you've got the channels and you've got the agency. The agency itself is a collective of some very smart individuals, specialists in each area, whether that is film, creative, digital creative, research, media planning and buying. The whole business was built around the shift to digital.
Right.
Because, Simon and Pete and Manolo had all come from a print media background,
And they saw where things were going.
and things, right? And all their best industry customers were saying, well, this digital thing, what do we do? What do we do? Display ads, are they a good thing? Like Google, what is this, right? And the business was built to enable those customers to navigate a global digital marketing landscape. And that was around creative and PR, as well as the media planning and buying side of things. I think media planning was definitely a key focus in the early days. It still remains a big part of their business, but they do an awful lot of creative ad campaigns, research, all sorts of stuff. Some really smart people, and I learned an awful lot while I was there. That's for sure. As an industry guy walking into, I think I was the only industry person in that business. Otherwise, they had a specialist in PR and specialists in all of which were keen cyclists. Every one of them there. So actually, it brought some balance to their business as well. So maybe some reality occasionally, because they had this guy who actually was sort of like more used to the retail and distribution and brand ownership side of cycling, right? So I was involved in an awful lot of projects with some really great brands. And I think during that time, I really increased my network because they were touching so many different brands and businesses and meeting so many people. And so my network really broadened during that time. And it was a great experience. But at the end of the pandemic, I was contacted by Brian and John, who were the founders of Extra UK. And they're old friends, and they were seeking to retire, and they were looking for someone to take over their very precious business ahead of its sale to some new owners. Extra is
A generational shift. They were ready to retire.
Yeah, absolutely. They created an incredible business. They knew I was always in awe of, and they knew I was passionate about their business. And so I think I was a fairly logical choice for them to reach out to. And, they've got a very carefully curated set of brands that they work with. We have 32 brands that we distribute, a couple of which are own brands, but they're predominantly, really premium market leading brands that we distribute exclusively in the UK. Brands like Topic, Physique, Pirelli, Met, Ergon, Enduro Bearings, Jaguar. I mean, the list goes on. Crank Brothers, On Guard, some really cool brands, some really great partners. And I helped them in the early days with the sale of the business.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Private equity.
You actually helped them with the sale.
Yeah, in the first few months, which was actually a really awesome grounding and experience to learn the bits of the business that I didn't. I helped them with all the due diligence, for example.
Sure.
And you really got to delve deep, delve under the hood,
For sure. Yeah.
and learn all the bits that you don't see from the outside, or you may not see when you initially walk into a business. So actually, I thank them for that, really, because it was a cracking foundation when you walk into a business to have done that sort of forced due diligence, I guess. And here I am, 3 years on.
So you work for the new owners now.
I do. Well, John and Brian are still stakeholders of the business. They're still involved. I still speak to them every couple of weeks, I guess. Always useful counsel and experience. And we've very much kept the same ethos and passion that they'd built within their business. Although through navigating some incredibly difficult times, 3 years ago was the start of a particularly difficult patch for the whole industry. So you could say I joined the business at the worst possible time, or certainly the biggest period of change for that business, right? And every day is a school day in an industry that's always evolving, and particularly so in the last couple of years. But our business is growing in all the ways that I could hope, right? Which is brilliant. So yeah, I'm enjoying the ride.
So, so I guess, yeah. So now you're at Extra, and you helped the family exit, or not exit, but get some. They wanted to to sell a part of the business, for to fund a retirement, and you said that they are still part of the business. So you're in Extra, and you said that Extra is focused primarily on P&A parts and accessories, and then they have this very. Sounds like you're very satisfied with the portfolio of brands that you guys have. So you had mentioned, I know what we had talked, but like a distributor, in your opinion, your view, should have an assortment that has a series of brands that complement each other, and that you can, I guess, tell me about how you go about the assortment, or that you see the assortment of a distributor should be seen, and makes for a successful assortment.
Well, assortment planning or assortment strategy within a distribution business is knowing your market, it's knowing your customers, and it's knowing the riders within your market. Part of knowing your market, for example, is that the UK's driven by a consolidation of supply. There are fewer distributors, which is also challenging when you're trying to work out your assortment, because sometimes there are simply too many brands available for the number of distributors within any given category. So, for example, I know of significant wheel brands in the UK that really struggle to find a distributor, purely because distributors already have good wheel brands within their assortment. Dealers in the UK, they want fewer suppliers doing more, right? They want to simplify their own business.
Absolutely, because that's time. That's an investment that they have to make.
100%, but then not too much as well. We have 32 brands, and I actually think that's pretty much a sweet spot for our business. I feel that we give every brand its deserved attention. If we were up there with 50, 60 brands, every brand, it feels like, has a fixed bandwidth requirement, whether it's big or
Sure,
small, right?
sure.
Sure, big ones take more time and effort, absolutely, but they have a minimum bandwidth requirement. So, much as sometimes something really sexy and attractive comes along commercially, it just doesn't make sense, because, it just requires that certain baseline of bandwidth. But for dealers, yeah, fewer suppliers, making it easier so that they can make a carriage paid order. And that works really well, ordering more frequently, but not paying carriage. And that works really well for the brands as well, because the distributor is essentially a shared resource that they're pulling into, but also a
Partner.
shared magnet, as it were, for retailers to come to and range their products. Assortment strategy is key. It's what makes your company more attractive, and greater value to both customers, to the brands, but also to as a business. And brands, but you do need a portfolio where brands complement each other, as you said. It's certainly possible to have several brands in one category, right? Perfectly simple. There are multiple retailers in any geographic location. Oftentimes they want brand differentiation from their neighboring store, right? You
Okay.
have a product to offer them both. Or it may be that the brands simply have a different proposition, right? Or one is more road focused, or one is more mountain bike focused. But certainly, it does tend to be that distributors will have one key brand within any given category. That's more the normal. So, you know, we have for example, in wheels, Extra distributes Crank Brothers, which is a great mountain bike wheel category offering. And then we have Scope as well. So we have two brands, one being very much off-road, one being very much on-road gravel, right, with Scope. So you can have multiple brands in a given category, but it's more normal to sort of think of gaps in your range. And, I don't have turbo trainers. I don't have this, do
Right.
I want a brand within said category? But then in an assortment strategy, you also have to think commercially, right, of what's going well, what do dealers want from you, So for example, workshop is always the most resilient area of a business, right?
Workshop.
Workshop. Oh, 100%.
Workshop.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. But even when bikes are selling well, bikes are still being fixed.
Fixed. Yeah. So that's an
Right?
area where you want to be focusing. Like that's something I would never think of, but yeah, absolutely.
Oh
That's
yeah. I
where,
mean, we have KMC, Jaguar, Enduro bearings, like key workshop brand Pirelli tires, key workshop brands staples. This is good, whether the industry is up or down, people are buying components to fix
yeah,
bikes, right?
absolutely.
So you get some stability in that for sure. That's another way to think about your assortment strategy, is thinking about essentially the category or use rather than necessarily just about brands.
Sure, of course. Let me ask you this. I sort of know the answer to this, but I want to hear what your take is on it. The floor plan of a dealer in the last 15 years, what have been the most drastic changes that you've seen in terms of what they stock and what they don't stock, or how that's sort of
Oh,
evolved?
that's actually quite a big topic, partly because the UK's always been slightly different. If you go into bike shops in Europe, retailers tend to do displays by brand, right? You used to get meters of brands used to measure how many meters of displays they had in store. So whereas in the UK we've always been category managed, so retailers will have multiple brands of pumps in one area, right? So that's always been a difference. I guess the key difference in the internet age in a in a
Sure, it's
in a
internet.
local
I knew that was
yeah.
coming.
Well, in a local bike shop now, really, the assortment's far more refined, and I think in these recent years, with far greater confidence and far greater cash flow tied up in bikes that haven't been selling so well, the onus has come on the distributor to hold stock. So retailers are way more working in a just-in-time basis. It's far harder to sell in new brands recently. It's far harder to displace product. It's very retailers in general, bricks and mortar retailers are running their business tighter, way more just in time. You can understand 100% why, but the onus then falls on the distributor to have effective distribution, to hold greater stock and greater stock risk ultimately, because when things are just in time, there's no pre-ordering going on. The
Right.
UK has never been a big pre-order market, unlike Scandinavia or Germany, where a whole season or the lion's share of a season has been pre-sold to retailers. We've never had that in the UK. So there's a great deal of risk and stock risk in being a distributor, particularly in the UK, but particularly in recent years. Yeah. And we stick, parts and accessories, or pack as they call it in the UK, parts, accessories, components, is kind of extra sweet spot. It's where we've been. We have distributed bikes in the past. I don't rule it out in the future, but given the current market climate and in general the way that the industry's changed, bikes is a far tougher proposition as a distributor. That
Why?
said,
Why?
weirdly, why?
Yeah,
Okay,
why?
well, return on investment. Ultimately, it was far easier when cash was cheap, right? But borrowing money now is very expensive. It to do properly the way that we like to distribute brands, as I said earlier, as a partner, marketing, properly invest in a brand. It requires a specific resource to do it properly. It's a far lower percentage margin. And given the current volumes and landscape, that sadly just doesn't stack up. I don't rule it out. I think, you look at bike brands, and many of the key brands are obviously direct in key markets, right? Specialized, etc., etc. Trek, they'll be direct within any given market. But then we're seeing other bigger brands going back to distribution. Cannondale recently went to Saddleback rather than being direct in the UK. I think Marin are doing the same sort of thing. There is there is
Opportunity.
a move back to
Yeah,
distribution.
there's an
Sure.
opportunity. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can we talk about Brexit a little bit? This was one of the main reasons why I actually had been curious about talking to someone in the UK, was to understand from someone on the inside of this. Like, can you just kind of hit the highlights of how Brexit has affected the bike business?
It's really difficult. I mean, the landscape is an absolute nightmare post Brexit in many ways. It possibly is settling slightly more, but unfortunately, the timing of Brexit hit at the beginning of the pandemic.
COVID, yeah.
So, so actually, what you ended up with was the obvious effects of Brexit. However, they were also masked by pandemic boom
Boom, yeah.
and and then bust ultimately. So it was, other than sort of like logistical issues and more technical issues, Brexit was hard to sort of pin down as a single fundamental problem. But now, the resulting landscape, as things begin to settle slightly, is that it's harder to be competitive globally in a post-Brexit world in the UK. I mean, the UK was known as I think Napoleon called us the nation of shopkeepers, right? We
We're
in
very
the
good at exporting, very good at the
we
UK,
were
very
we
good
were for sure. Yeah,
at
Wiggle
supplying.
Wiggle Wiggle in its early
Oh my
days
God,
was
that amazing.
selling to Korea, Japan, all over Europe,
Australia.
Australia. They were absolutely huge, and all of that business was being channeled through the UK market. But in a post-Brexit world, it's actually very difficult to export at retail.
Absolutely. But your business is focused on the UK. So in that regard, it hasn't
100%.
affected you personally
No,
as a
it,
brand
it has affected UK distributors, because ultimately those international retailers were buying their stock through
from distributors, right?
from a UK distributor, right? So suddenly that business is smaller.
But the customers aren't buying from mainland Europe anymore, or less. They're
No,
buying
well,
less.
that is the unfortunate effect of Brexit, is that actually, although it's very hard for UK retailers to sell outside of the UK, it's actually very easy for UK consumers to buy from Europe.
Oh, okay. I thought that there was a double wall there, but it sounds like
No, I mean, there kind of technically is. However, it seems far easier to break inbound. And so the UK as a key market has always been seen as a bit of a dumping ground by brands and by retailers, international retailers, and that is still the case, sadly. So you tend to see a lot of discounted grey market product, but also international e-tailers actively targeting the UK, whether that is as a seller on Amazon or their direct e-commerce business. The UK is still seen as quite a sweet spot. Part of the issue with Brexit is duty. There are additional duties paid for some goods coming into the UK. So you get, like, if those goods have already come from Asia into Europe, for example, and paid duty at that point, you then get an extra duty on top, double
Europe,
duty, as it were,
Europe today, yeah.
which makes it very, very hard to compete with European price points, retail price points, right? So we seem expensive. No one sadly is just adding extra margin. We seem even more expensive than we did before. So Brexit has certainly made the landscape a lot more complicated. It has, and the irony being, we still have to comply with all the European rules and all the standards and everything else. So we've got the headache, but without the same level of business. And we are once again an island. Yeah. And then, as I said, that happened around the same time as the pandemic. And I think the pandemic Obviously, we experienced in the UK an extreme boom, right? Crazy long lead times, all the stuff everyone knows about,
Sure.
being, having to place large purchase orders in order to be able to secure stock. Much of that stock arriving after the bust of the boom
Yeah,
bust,
after the demand was
right?
gone.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure these are stories recounted
Yeah, we have.
by everyone many times, right? So we had that same situation, but that was all timed around Brexit as well. So you had that start of Brexit where things were unknown, people were still exporting, etc., etc. At the same time as the boom, then came. It's like a double bust. In fact, it's a triple bust as well because economically, as a country, the UK has been doing particularly poorly
Right.
during that period as well. So with a great, massive changes in costs of living, poor, yeah, poor, I think the second poorest, or if not the poorest economy at certain stages, and the resulting lowest consumer confidence that's been measured in history. So less people buying, more stock, less people buying has
But
made
but
it
it
an
sounds
easier.
like you at Extra had some really good kind of foundation that you guys have had some strong footing and you guys are pushing through and as opposed to some other, you said that 9 distributors have closed in the
Yeah.
last
The
2 years.
UK lost 9 distributors over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. Some pretty significant ones as well, like more large were huge. Raleigh Parts and Accessories was a big business. And then quite a few small ones as well. Yeah, 9 distribution businesses have disappeared from the UK market. A great deal of retailers as well, and particularly obviously some big key accounts like Wiggle and Chain Reaction.
Yeah,
Uh,
so I wanted to go into Wiggle and understand that was a gigantic piece of business there.
mhm.
And where did all that business go?
It's a mix, really. Again, part of that perfect storm of the pandemic was that in the UK we had a weird thing where bike shops were allowed to stay open. So all the businesses had to close, but bike shops, because they were linked to a form of
Essential.
transport,
Yep.
right, were allowed to stay open. I remember during the pandemic walking down to my local bike shop, Berkshire Cycles, awesome shop, and there was like 100-meter queue, 2 meters apart, obviously, down the street of people trying to get to the bike shop. But what happened was that e-bikes arriving and people realizing they didn't want to buy them digitally, the pandemic being there and bike shops being able to be open meant that IBDs were able to reconnect with their local community. So bike shops became stronger again, which was awesome. So I think bike shops have picked up a fair bit of share anyway, but that happened before the death of some of these key accounts. Um, I think during the pandemic, Amazon had one of the strongest, most resilient delivery networks. And remember that it wasn't just the cycling enthusiast in the house, it was the wife and the kids and like, so shopping habits changed a little bit and Amazon grew their share a bit during the
Sure.
pandemic as well. And has probably held on to some of that. And then there are some other significant UK retailers like bikeparts.co.uk, Sigma, Treads, Wheelies, Tweaks, who've definitely all grown as a result as well. So it's kind of been spread about a bit, which frankly, as a distributor, is great because your risk is spread. I
Sure.
think for consumers, it's pretty good too. So the end result, albeit smaller, is a good result.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't think net Wiggle kind of just with its tentacles into everywhere when they were discounting a lot. And I just remember they had so many brands. And I was just like, why do they have so many freaking brands? It's just too many brands. It was just the way that they merchandised it got to be really insane at the end of the day. And I would talk to brands, and be like, we got on Wiggle. And I'd be like, man, that's, okay, great. And they'll be discounting that in 6 months. And then 2 years later, you're going to try it again. Because they literally had like a long tail of brands over there that was just insane.
In the early days, both Wiggle and Chain Reaction, as two separate businesses, were awesome businesses. They were real people and they were good people and they were great people to work with on your brand for an online presence. Tough to manage, sure. Yeah, they were price creators and price chasers, but as the business evolved and what we saw, the UK kind of saw a 2011 to I think it was April 2014. I seem to remember everything dying off. We had a kind of golden few years in the bike industry where everything was awesome, but then all of a sudden there was VC money coming into every aspect of the industry. There was, and what you found was, instead of the buyer being someone who was an experienced buyer
Sure.
in cycling, suddenly it was someone they'd bought in from a supermarket chain, right? And the whole perspective changed, the whole way of working changed. There was, like, to a degree, a loss of specialism in some of these businesses. And I think that's a big part of, cycling industry. It's not a complicated industry, right? Not really, but you need to understand it. You need to know it, right? And I think sometimes the outsider's perspective and experience is valuable, but in a lot of cases, if you lose that industry foundation, that industry grounding, you lose it.
Well, also the realistic expectations of what a cycling business can how much it can grow, because during COVID, like, all this VC money came in, and I've seen it, and I've had conversations where you can just tell that, these people don't understand it, how small this business is. And, there's not that much money in cycling. There really isn't. It's a very niche business. And if you think that you're going to throw a bunch of money at it and that's going to come pop like a fashion brand, you're completely mistaken.
No, but I think I'm still a great believer in the cycle business.
No, I am too. I'm just saying that there
Yeah,
are there
but
are
I'm also a
limits.
believer. I'm a
There are
believer in
limits to what it can you expect from it.
there are. I think sometimes our industry sets its own limits a bit too much. Price inflation has made cycling almost the new golf. It used to embrace every type of consumer, right? Whether it was a form of transport or an enthusiast, a pastime. We are we are outpricing people from cycling, and there is a real danger in that. However, it is ultimately great for your health, great for the environment, a great form of transport, all of these things that cycling and a great pastime, and something that, if you are really, it's something great to be an enthusiast of, partly because it has a supporting sport, professional sport, but also because there is an unending source of things to buy and upgrade and, get into. Cycling is freaking awesome. But at the moment, we are in danger of restricting the size of the industry, either by making it the new sailing, making it too premium and inaccessible, or not competing with some of the other challenges like kids' bikes, and getting kids on bikes, which is a real challenge.
I think, like you said, it's the positioning of it has been pushed up. And I think that is because the enthusiast side of things, it's easier to communicate. Working in this business, and I'm sure you understand this much better than I do, communicating with an enthusiast from a messaging standpoint is actually quite logical and straightforward. Communicating with all the other cyclists that are out there is not. Potential
Correct.
cyclists out
Because
there. It's
there's
so
a
hard.
difference. There's community, right?
Right.
Enthusiast cycling has community. They read websites. They read bike magazines.
They
You know,
identify themselves.
they're easier people to touch. Whereas somebody who needs a bike for transport, or that job is B2B. That job is the retailer's job,
Yeah.
right?
To make it
That's
available.
the
Yeah.
so yes, having it available, being able to explain it in store, having the right product fit for every consumer. The problem we have at the moment is there aren't necessarily so many of those consumers walking in, the non-enthusiast.
Going back to the environment that we've created has been almost at times somewhat standoffish even.
Yeah, yeah, yes, a little. There's always a danger for it to become too elitist. I think, to be honest, a lot of it's happening around price and other alternative methods of transport. I mean, you know, bike share schemes, particularly in huge cities like London, are really growing. They continue to grow. Um,
E-scooters,
yeah, well, e-scooters are a very separate topic, and one that, to be honest, I just don't know enough about,
right? Well, Uber even.
nor want to. But bike share schemes, I think, have got rid of a lot of the sort of inner city. They've made it easier for people living in the larger cities to have a bike without the commitment. There's all sorts of complex limitations, I guess, that are affecting us right now.
Like the commuter side of things. And so
The
that's
commuter side
also,
of things, yeah,
and so
yeah.
that's also pushing brands to invest more in the enthusiast side because
Yeah,
they're
but
seeing the growth there.
it's also complicated because commuting in the UK, yes, we used to sell a load of hybrid bikes. You rarely hear them called hybrids anymore, but we used to sell a load of those kind of bikes. But the reality was, if you went into central London and you saw people commuting on bike, most of them were doing it dressed in lycra on a Cervelo. You know, it was an enthusiast consumer market, a commuter market. We've never had that kind of Dutch family e-bike premium, commuting. We haven't had the infrastructure, and to be honest, where we do have the infrastructure in the UK, it doesn't get used or it isn't well received. So it's a very complex situation in the UK for sure.
So in terms of the situation today, I know we talked a lot about what happened in the past, but where do you see things today, Will, in terms of the market?
I think it's still evolving. I think that the reality is that a lot of the market overstocks have pushed through, particularly in parts and accessories. I think that market is normalizing from a stock and starting to from a price and margin perspective as well, right? You're starting to see a bit more brand integrity coming back to the market, in the
In terms of
reality.
discounting, you mean?
Yeah, I think there is more price stabilization for sure because there's less clearance product around.
Right.
But there are some categories still heavily troubled by that. And then but bikes is an entirely separate topic. I think we've still got a couple more years of pain on bikes.
Wow.
And I think the UK is still seen as a bit of a dumping ground for stock because it does remain a key market. And so I think, yeah, and I think it's particularly the bigger brands, possibly the biggest two, the greatest unknown in that, because I think they're still sat on an awful lot of stock, and that can affect the whole of the market,
Sure.
whether it's
The
retail or other brands in distribution. I think there are green shoots. I mean, I was at the Bicycle Association meeting on Wednesday, their annual meeting, where they have the UK the UK bicycle industry has an awesome market data service where they collect retail sales data, and they Wednesday was their presentation of all the stats for 2024. And it wasn't good reading. It was, as an industry, it wasn't a good reading. The UK's market value in cycling was down 2% in 2024. And I think that was on 2023, which was an utterly horrible year for the entire industry, the worst, the low point. Volume was broadly flat. Parts and accessories was the same, -2% in volume, but up on value, which is quite interesting. 3% gain in value is a sure sign of the ridiculous inflation that we've achieved, because remember all the discounting, right? So
Sure.
if the value's still
Yeah.
3%,
Yeah. There
right?
was
You
on top
know,
of all the discounting.
yeah, on top of all the discounting, but ultimately 16% down on 2019,
My
right? So
goodness. And that was
pre-pandemic less.
before COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. And interestingly, they said that parts and accessories now makes up 30% of the market value. That's
Where
the
was what was it before?
I'm not sure, but never that high.
It was never that high. Okay.
Never that high. A third of the value of the market being parts and accessories, is pretty significant. Bike sales were -4% and e-bikes -5%, which is a whole topic in itself.
Yeah.
Road bikes, premium is the only sources of growth. Gravel bikes as well, but actually more in volume than in value. The saddest thing, I guess, is that for the first time in a long time, participation figures are down 3% for last year, which we've generally only seen a gain in that over the years, steady increase. It was actually -6% in the first half of last year, which is not entirely surprising as it rained in the UK
Sure.
for almost entirely that whole period of time. Yeah, but all of that negativity, for extra, we had a great 2024. We had a brutal 23. Everyone had a brutal 23. You had distributors posting millions in losses. We didn't lose money. Just 2024, we certainly had a big improvement, which is great. And 2025, we continue to be onwards and upwards. So I remain very satisfied, and fortunately, so do our owners.
Yes, that is very important.
I think for the right people, you know, it's bright in the UK. I think things will bounce back. We're seeing the green shoots, particularly in parts and accessories. And I think as long as you continue to add value, right? That's as a brand, as a distributor, that's as a retailer, as a product, right? Then I do think that the future remains pretty bright for cycling.
No, I totally agree. And obviously coming from where we came from, and it feels like what we got through and what we've gotten through, shows the resilience of everything. But Will, I wanted to thank you for taking the time today, because your candor and your experience to lend that to me and to the community that I'm building here is unbelievably valuable. So thank you very much for coming on. This
You're
has
very
been
welcome.
an absolute blast. I cannot wait to publish this, because this is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to zero in on, I think, UK is such an important market, and for you to give us, this gift. Thank you very much. I think we'll probably see each other at Eurobike, and I will definitely buy you a pint or two.
I'm sure I'll accept.
Okay. Well, thank you, Will. If people want to get in touch with you, where's a good place to do that?
The easiest way is probably via my LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, cool. Thank you again, Will, and enjoy the rest of your spring. Hopefully it's going to be a little more sunny.
It's sunny right now.
Okay.
Also frosty, but sunny. So I'll take the positive. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks, Will.